All right, so we'll take a look at converting your logo into an embroidery file and teach you some things about digitizing, what works, what doesn't work. We're going to be using Inkscape, which is a free vector graphics application. Now, we don't have to use Inkscape, so if you're more familiar with like Adobe Illustrator or something like that, you could use that. Inkscape is a PC-only application, however. So if you're going to use your Mac, you would have to get the Parallels software and create a Windows partition where you could then use any Windows-based software. Again, Inkscape is free, and the extension to convert your vector artwork into embroidery stitches is also free, and that's called InkStitch. So you go under extensions here and you'll see InkStitch once you've downloaded and installed the InkStitch extension. Okay, so let's just go ahead and import your logo. So File, Import, and we will type in KC here and open up the file that you sent us. Go ahead and accept those defaults. Drag it over here. Now the first thing we're going to do is resize this to the size of our finished embroidery file. So we're going to change our units of measure to inches. And for the width, let's just make it 3.5 inches wide, like it's going to go on a polo or something like that. All right. So this is the actual size of our finished embroidery. So I'm going to grab my pen tool here. And one thing that I would recommend if you're going to use InkStitch is that we start to memorize our keyboard shortcuts. It just saves us a lot of time, and our pen tool is B. Okay, so you'll see me use keyboard shortcuts a lot probably in this video. So anyhow, grab our pen tool and we're going to just recreate a piece of this artwork here so we can kind of see what it looks like. Okay, now if we go over to stroke style here, currently we have a very small stroke width here, but we're going to change that to 3 millimeters. Now the reason I changed it to 3 millimeters is because in the embroidery world, that is kind of been determined to be the smallest size that we can accept for embroidery can be converted into a satin stitch. 3 millimeters. Now 3 millimeters is 1/16 of an inch, so that's very, very tiny, and really from a real practical standpoint, it's really 6 millimeters, which is an 1/8 of an inch column, which an 1/8 of an inch is also very, very tiny. So, but 3 millimeters is absolutely dead the tiniest satin column you could do, and it will look terrible. So for this example, because this is the overall size of this design is so small, we're not going to recreate this logo exactly the way this file is given to us. Okay, it's just the details are just, this is very, very tiny, and it won't embroider worth a darn. So we're not going to do that. Okay. So at any rate, we will go back to our pencil here, and again, we're going to draw a path, and for the width of, we're going to do, I don't know, 0.1, I guess will be fine. And then we'll grab our node tool, which is N for node, and then we'll just make that curvature, okay? And then back to our pen tool, so B, and we'll click, click, and click. Grab our node tool. Okay. Now, in order to convert to satin stitches, these two paths have to be combined into one. So we're going to click on one path here, shift click, and click on the other. And then we're going to go to path and choose combine. And notice the keyboard shortcut there is Control K. So we'll use that going forward. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each one of these design elements. So there's my first one. B for my pen tool. Click, click, and click. And then again, click, click, and click. And I'm right-clicking to end, switching to my node tool here to make that bend. And then come over here, click on the path, and then we can use our node tool to convert that. And then our selection tool is just S. Remember, we shift-clicked and hit Control-K. Okay? So we're going to do that, and then we're going to do this one. So back to B. So click, click, and click. Right-click, and click. And we're left-clicking, 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 and then right-clicking. Node tool, bend, click on the path, node tool, bend, S for selection tool, Control K. That combines those two together. Back up top here, same thing, B for pen tool, click, click, and click, right click to end, click, click, and click, right click to end, back to our node tool, give this a little bit of a bend, click on the path, give that a little bit of a bend, selection tool, select them both, and Control K. All right. So now we have gone ahead and created our objects that we need. Let's go ahead and convert the K to stitches and before we move to the C. So we'll select all of those paths. We'll go to extensions. We'll choose InkStitch. We'll come down here to params. And this is where we tell the software what we want this to be. So we don't want running stitches. We want it to be satin columns. And then you could see that it does, in fact, create our satin stitches for us. Okay. Now, you see up here how these stitches are kind of bunched together and they kind of go at this, I don't know, I guess I call it a weird angle where everything else is kind of nice and horizontal. I don't really like the way this is. But we can change that, so no worries. So we'll come in here. Let's just cancel that, I think, for the time being. And let's go in and show you how we control the angle of our stitches. We'll go to our pencil tool, which is P for pencil, and we're just going to create some horizontal lines. Okay? And click, and click, and click, and click. And you'll kind of get a feel for how many lines you actually need to create. We don't really need that many lines to control our stitch angle, but we do need to combine those newly created lines. Let me undo that here. We do need to create those newly created lines and combine those with our original path. So remember path, combine, or Control K. And now we'll go back into params and we'll assign the parameters for everything. So back to InkStitch params. And again, we're not going to do running stitches. We're going to do satin columns. We can also control the spacing of our satin stitches and so forth. We can do, quite a few things here, but we won't get into all the details. There is a lot to learn when it comes to embroidery digitizing. But the main thing here is you can see that our stitches are nice and horizontal and they're not all bunched up at a weird angle on that piece. So that is working like we want it to, but we do want to add a contour underlay. Almost always when you're doing satin stitches, do you want to do a contour underlay? Again, back to lots to learn, but we're just going to accept the default contour underlay, and then I'm also going to add a zigzag underlay here as well. So, and I like to have my zigzag to be 2 millimeters generally, but there again, it depends on the material that we're stitching on and so forth. There's lots of details when it comes to what underlay to use depending on what fabrics we're stitching on, and a lot of different details. So now our letter K is going to stitch out exactly the way we want it to. The only thing that we have to still do to this is we need to add a trim command because we don't want all this silly business going every which direction. So, for now, we'll choose apply and quit. But we are going to go back in there and add a trim command. In fact, we could do that right now while we're thinking about it. So we come over here to extensions and back to InkStitch, and then our edit, or excuse me, commands, attach commands to selected objects, and we are going to attach the trim thread after sewing this object on all of them. Yes, we do need it on all of them. So we'll go ahead and choose apply, and you'll see a little icon being added to all of those, and that it basically just says trim, 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 trim. So when we come under extensions and we come in here let's go back into, let's do the visualize simulator mode here. And you will see that now it's going to stitch everything out, of course, but it's going to trim and then move on to the next piece. And then it'll trim and move on to the next piece. So now we don't have those threads going every which direction on our logo. So we'll go ahead and close that out. You can see our K consists of 574 stitches. So very good. All right. So that takes care of that. So basically what we need to do is repeat that same process over here on our letter C here. And let's go back to layers real quick. I want to take a look at something. So our top left is going to stitch first, then our bottom left, and then our bottom right, and then our top right. So yes, so C would be the top part of our C would be the next thing that would stitch. So we'll hit B for pen tool, and we're going to click and click and click and click and come down here and click, right click to end that command, N for node edit. And then we're going to just move that a little bit. And we're going to move that a little bit. If we click on the nodes, we do get some control handles, so we could really fine tune exactly what we would want. But go back to our pen tool, B, click, click. And, you know, once you figure out exactly how the software works, you'll know how many nodes you need to add in order to get the curvatures the way you want them. So it just takes a little bit of playing, but you can see now that's all looking good. So we'll go ahead and combine those two, Control K. And then we need to do the same thing to the bottom here. So back to our B tool for pen. Click, click, up here, click, right click. Node edit tool. Pull that down. Pull that down. Pull that down. Back to B. Click. Of course, B is pen. Click, click, and click. End tool. Node edit. All right. And then we'll combine those two. Control K. Now we do need to specify the params, so we do want those to be satin columns. So we'll go under extensions. We will choose InkStitch params. And of course we don't want running stitches, so we are going to have satin columns. And you can see that a couple things here does a pretty good job. I don't like the way that these angles are down here. You can see it's kind of weird there. Also up here, I don't like this kind of sideward motion. Don't really like that. So we're going to have to specify some stitch angles on both pieces to get those to happen exactly the way we want them to happen. And of course, we have to add some underlay and things of that nature. So we'll hit cancel for now. And we're going to add some stitch angles to both of these pieces. So again, we'll go back to our pencil tool and we'll start down here. And we're just going to drag out some lines. And again, once you've kind of used this software, you'll get a better idea of how many lines that need to be added. We'll go to Path and Combine. And then up top here, we're going to do the same thing. P for pencil. And then we'll add some stitch angles here. That should do it. And then let's go in and combine those. I do want this one to stitch before this one. So I'm just going to move it down one. So it's going to stitch in the order from bottom to top. So you see here, we have the top left part of our K, bottom left. We have our bottom right, top right, and then the top of our C and the bottom of our C in that order. Now, one other thing that we do want to do is we do want to add a command to trim this when it jumps to that. So back to extensions and InkStitch. Remember, we do commands, attach commands, and they trim the thread after that object. Easy enough. So now, when we go into our stitch preview here, extensions, InkStitch, visualize simulator, you will see that we won't have any jump stitches between each section of our lettering. We can kind of fast forward our stitch preview here. We did mess up a little bit here because we did not go in, when we added our stitch angles, we did not go back in and set those as satin stitches. That was my fault. So let's go in and do that. Go back. We have to go back into params. So when we add something, we have to go and reset, tell the software that no, we want those to be satin column. There we go. We need our contour underlay. We need our zigzag underlay. And we need to be 2 millimeters. But one thing you'll see is that the stitch angle here is nice and clean, just the way we want it. So apply and quit. Now we will take a look at the whole kit and caboodle here. So InkStitch visualize simulator. We'll go ahead and speed that up a little bit. We'll go ahead and let it do its thing, but you can see that our stitch angles are all nice and correct. And we'll switch over to a realistic view here just so we can see it a little better. And now you can see that the realistic stitching, how all that looks. And yes, that's going to look very nice. All right. So excellent. We've got all that taken care of. We're looking good. Now what we have to do is we have to talk about our font, our text. So this particular text, this tiny, is not going to stitch out very well if we recreate the font exactly the way it was originally. So just kind of bear that in mind. We are going to go ahead and stitch it out, but with this font, or a font very similar to this, but just bear in mind it probably won't stitch out very well, and we'll have to either choose a different font or maybe make some adjustments, and we'll talk about that as we go. So InkStitch comes with a bunch of pre-digitized fonts. I mean, like a bunch. I don't know like how many, like maybe 50 or 60. I mean, it comes with a pretty healthy number of pre-digitized fonts. And so we'll go into extensions here, and we'll choose InkStitch, and we'll choose lettering. And it'll bring up this menu, and it kind of always starts us off here. This is the font that, because the text is so tiny, this is probably what ultimately we want to use because it was designed specifically to stitch out cleanly, very tiny. But what we're going to choose is a different one, just to be complicated. We're going to choose this one because I think it more resembles the original text. So we'll just type in fitness repair here. Okay, so there is fitness repair. And you could see that if you kind of combine that to the original text, it's pretty similar. So we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. And what that will do is it will create it up here. And of course we have to shrink it down because that's way too big for our design. Okay. And we can make it a little bit bigger, obviously. So basically what we want to do is we want this to be as big as it can be and still look the way we want it to look. So obviously I have this, the F is sticking out past the original. The R is obviously past the original, but as long as we like that look, like that's okay, we need this text to be as big as it can be. Okay, and that's why I'm kind of making it bigger than it was originally, because we need it to be. And I'll explain that here when I show you this. So let's go ahead and look at this just like I have it. So we'll go back under visualize and see why we need it as big as we can make it. We will go ahead and fast forward our stitching here so we can blaze through this. So on screen here, everything looks great, right? But in reality, it's not going to stitch out very well. And I really feel like we need to stitch this out so you can see what we see on screen is not necessarily what we get when we stitch it out. So you could see right here, this column is very tiny. Okay, the width of that, all of these, even this is very tiny. It looks big on screen, but in reality, when we go to stitch it out, you know, that is, you know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch wide, like it's really tiny. It's only a few millimeters. So, but we're going to stitch it out just the way it is so we could see it. Now, there are some things that we can do when we're dealing with tiny text. So one thing that we can do that helps us define text a little bit more clearly when it's so thin is to use a different weight embroidery thread, but increase the density of stitches. That will help us sharpen our text when we're stitching very tiny text. So that's kind of one of the tricks. We use a slightly lighter weight thread, but we increase the density, and that will help us define our text a little bit better. So in this case, I do want to go into params here. So we're going to select that. We'll go under extensions and choose InkStitch params. And let's just take a look at this to see if we can modify the params a little bit. So you can see here on satin column, there are some predefined parameters. The zigzag spacing from peak to peak is at 0.3. So if we wanted to increase that, or rather decrease that, that will ultimately increase our stitches. So you can kind of see that there. And that may help us, may not help us, honestly. I don't know. I don't think that's going to stitch out very cleanly, but I guess we can try it and find out. But that is one thing that might help us a little bit, is just increasing the density a little bit. So that's it. That is our completed file. So that looks pretty good. So now if we click on File, Save As, and you'll see that there will be an option down here to save it InkStitch Brother Embroidery Format, PES. So that is kind of the standard file type. So we'll do KC Fitness PES. Okay. And then we will go to the embroidery machine. I'll put this on a thumb drive, which I have right here in front of me. So I will put this on a thumb drive, and then we'll go to the computer, the tablet, and the embroidery machine, and we'll stick this in there and see how it stitches out.